The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I stared at the wall of monitors displaying real-time satellite feeds from 3 different continents. My fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced precision, cross-referencing intelligence reports that had come in during the night shift. The coffee in my paper cup had gone cold hours ago, but I barely noticed. This was my world. A windowless room in a nondescript building outside Fort Bragg, North Carolina, where decisions that could save or cost lives were made in the span of heartbeats. "Martinez, you need to see this," called out Jake from across the room. His voice carried that edge that meant something was wrong. I saved my work and walked over to his station, my sneakers silent on the polished concrete floor. The morning briefing was in 10 minutes, and I could already feel the familiar knot forming in my stomach. Another day of providing critical intelligence, another day of watching someone else present my findings, another day of being told to step back when the cameras rolled. "What have we got?" I asked, leaning over Jake's shoulder to study the thermal imaging on his screen. "Looks like our guys walked into something nasty about 40 clicks northwest of the Syrian border. Communication went dark 3 hours ago." Jake's jaw was tight as he zoomed in on the heat signatures scattered across what looked like a bombed-out village. My heart skipped. I knew exactly which team was operating in that sector. I'd been tracking their mission parameters for the past week, providing route analysis and threat assessments. More importantly, I knew that Sergeant Marcus Rivera was leading that squad, the same Marcus who'd grown up 3 blocks from me in El Paso, the same Marcus who'd promised to grab dinner with me when he got back from this deployment. "How many?" I managed to ask, keeping my voice steady despite the ice forming in my chest. 12 went out. We're seeing maybe 8 heat signatures, but they're not moving. Could be injured, could be worse. Jake glanced up at me, and I could see my own concern reflected in his eyes. Everyone in this room knew what it meant when soldiers went quiet in hostile territory. The door to the operations center burst open, and Colonel Patricia Hayes strode in with her usual no-nonsense energy. At 52, she commanded respect from everyone in the building, and her silver hair was always pulled back in a perfect bun that somehow never showed the stress of 16-hour days. "People, we have a situation," she announced, though we all already knew. "Team Bravo 7 has gone dark in Sector 4. I need options, and I need them fast." I stepped forward before I could second-guess myself. "Colonel, I've been monitoring that area for the past 72 hours. There's been increased chatter about IED placements along their primary and secondary routes. If they followed protocol, they should have taken the northern path through the valley, but that puts them directly in line with a sniper nest we identified yesterday." Colonel Hayes turned her full attention to me, her gray eyes sharp and calculating. "Martinez, what are you thinking?" The room fell silent, except for the constant hum of electronics and the soft clicking of keyboards. This was my moment. Not to step back, not to let someone else present my analysis, but to speak up for the soldiers whose lives depended on getting this right. "There's a third route," I said, moving to the main display screen and pulling up the topographical map I'd been studying all morning. "It's not in any of the official tactical manuals because it requires going through what looks like impassable terrain. But if you overlay the geological surveys from 2019 with the recent satellite imagery, there's a narrow passage here that would put a rescue team about 200 meters from Bravo 7's last known position." I traced the route with my finger, aware that every person in the room was hanging on my words. This was what I'd trained for, what I'd studied for, what I'd been preparing for through countless 18-hour days analyzing data that most people would find mind-numbingly boring. The passage is steep and would require specialized equipment, but it's completely outside the enemy's established patrol routes. They wouldn't expect an approach from that direction because it looks impossible on paper. Colonel Hayes studied the map for a long moment, then looked back at me. "Martinez, I want you to coordinate this mission. You know that terrain better than anyone else in here." My pulse quickened. "Ma'am, are you sure? I mean, I'm sure. You've got the best analytical mind in this room, and right now that's what those soldiers need." She turned to address the rest of the team. "Martinez is running point on this rescue operation. Everyone else supports her lead." For the first time in my 3 years working intelligence, I wasn't being asked to step back. I wasn't being told that someone else would handle the briefing, that someone else would coordinate with the field teams, that someone else would get the credit if things went right, or take the blame if they went wrong. The next 6 hours blurred together in a series of radio communications, tactical adjustments, and constant monitoring of the rescue team's progress through that treacherous mountain passage. I guided them through terrain that would have been impossible to navigate using standard maps, calling out obstacles and course corrections based on real-time satellite feeds and ground-penetrating radar data I'd compiled. When the rescue team finally reached Bravo 7's position, they found what we'd feared. The unit had been pinned down by sniper fire for hours, with 3 soldiers seriously wounded and the rest running low on ammunition. But because of the unconventional approach route I'd planned, the rescue team was able to eliminate the sniper threat and extract all 12 soldiers without a single additional casualty. As the medical helicopters lifted off from the extraction point, carrying Marcus and his team to safety, I finally allowed myself to breathe. The operations center erupted in quiet celebration, the kind of subdued cheering that happens when professionals do their job well under impossible circumstances. Colonel Hayes approached my station as I was filing the after-action report. "Martinez, that was exceptional work today. Those soldiers are alive because of your analysis and coordination." "Thank you, ma'am. I'm just glad everyone made it out." She paused, studying me with those sharp gray eyes. "You know, we're going to have some media coverage of this rescue. It's a good news story, and headquarters wants to show the public that their tax dollars are being put to good use." My stomach dropped. I knew what was coming next. "I'm going to need you to stay out of the interviews. Keep a low profile during the press briefings. You understand how these things work? Operational security, classified methods, that sort of thing?" I nodded, forcing a smile. "Of course, ma'am. I understand." But as I watched Colonel Hayes walk away to coordinate with the Public Affairs Office, I felt that familiar sting of invisibility settling back over me like a heavy blanket. Once again, my work would be presented by someone else, my analysis would be credited to intelligence assets, and my name would never appear in any official report that saw the light of day. 3 days later, I sat in my apartment in Fayetteville, watching the evening news coverage of the daring rescue mission that had saved 12 American soldiers. The footage showed Colonel Hayes briefing reporters, followed by interviews with the rescued soldiers who praised the exceptional intelligence work that had made their rescue possible. Marcus appeared on screen, his left arm in a sling but his smile genuine as he spoke to the reporter. Someone back home did their homework on this one. The rescue team knew exactly where to find us and exactly how to get us out. We owe our lives to the intelligence analysts who coordinated this mission. I wanted to feel proud, wanted to focus on the fact that Marcus and his team were safe, but instead, I found myself wondering if this was how it would always be, me in the shadows, watching other people get credit for work I'd poured my heart and soul into. My phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus. "Just wanted you to know, I heard through the grapevine that you were involved in getting us out of that mess. Thank you, Nick. I owe you dinner and a lot more when I get back stateside." I stared at the message for a long time, feeling a complex mix of emotions I couldn't quite name: relief that he was safe, frustration at the system that kept me invisible, and something else, a growing sense that maybe it was time to stop accepting the shadows as my permanent address. Outside my apartment window, the North Carolina evening was settling into that golden hour when the light turns everything soft and forgiving. I made myself a fresh cup of coffee and sat down at my laptop, not to work, but to think about what I really wanted from this career, from this life. For the first time in 3 years, I started to wonder what it would feel like to step into the light. 2 weeks later, I was back in the operations center, settling into what I'd assumed would be another routine morning of data analysis and intelligence briefing preparation. The rescue mission had already faded from the news cycle, replaced by congressional hearings and celebrity scandals that captured the public's short attention span. Life in the intelligence world had returned to its normal rhythm of classified reports and anonymous contributions to missions I'd never be publicly associated with. Marcus had returned from deployment, and we'd managed to grab that dinner he'd promised. Nothing fancy, just pizza at a place near the base where the tables were sticky and the jukebox played country music from the 1990s. He'd told me stories about the deployment, carefully avoiding the classified details but painting a picture of endless desert patrols and the kind of boredom punctuated by terror that defined modern military operations. "I still can't believe how perfectly that rescue went," he'd said over his second slice of pepperoni pizza. It was like someone had been watching over us, mapping out every possible obstacle and planning for every contingency. I'd smiled and changed the subject, but his words had stuck with me. That was exactly what I'd been doing, watching over them, mapping obstacles, planning for contingencies. It was my job, but hearing him describe it that way made it feel like something more. This particular morning started differently, though. Colonel Hayes called me into her office at 800 hours, which was unusual since our normal briefings didn't start until 900. Her office was exactly what you'd expect from a career military officer: framed commendations on the walls, a small American flag on her desk, and a bookshelf filled with tactical manuals and intelligence textbooks. "Martinez, sit down," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. Her tone was neutral, which could mean anything from commendation to reprimand in military speak. "Yes, ma'am." She opened a folder and pulled out what looked like an official document with several signatures at the bottom. "I received an interesting phone call yesterday from General Patricia Morrison at the Pentagon. Do you know who General Morrison is?" I shook my head. "No, ma'am." She's a two-star general who oversees Special Operations Intelligence Coordination. She called me specifically to ask about you. My stomach tightened. In the intelligence world, being specifically asked about by Pentagon generals was rarely a good thing. It usually meant someone thought you'd made a mistake, compromised an operation, or violated some protocol you didn't even know existed. Ma'am, if I've done something wrong? Colonel Hayes held up a hand to stop me. Relax, Martinez. It seems that Sergeant Rivera, when he was debriefed after his rescue, specifically mentioned that he'd heard through informal channels that an analyst named Martinez had been instrumental in coordinating the mission that saved his team. He was quite insistent that this analyst deserved formal recognition. I blinked, trying to process this information. Marcus had mentioned me by name in his official debrief. That was completely outside normal protocol, and could have gotten both of us in serious trouble. General Morrison was intrigued, Colonel Hayes continued. So she did some digging into the operation files. She discovered that you had indeed been the primary coordinator for that rescue mission, and that your tactical analysis had been, in her words, exceptional and potentially doctrine-changing. Doctrine-changing? I repeated. Not sure I'd heard correctly. Your approach route through that mountain passage has been reviewed by the Army's Tactical Training Command. They're considering incorporating your analysis methods into their advanced intelligence training curriculum. Colonel Hayes leaned back in her chair, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely pleased. Martinez, you're being recommended for the Intelligence and Security Command's Award for Excellence. The room seemed to tilt slightly. I'd heard of the ISC Award for Excellence. It was given to maybe 3 or 4 intelligence professionals each year, recognizing contributions that had significant impact on mission success and soldier safety. It wasn't just a pat on the back. It was career-defining recognition that opened doors to advanced training, special assignments, and leadership opportunities. Ma'am, I don't know what to say. There is one complication, Colonel Hayes said, her expression becoming more serious. General Morrison wants to present this award at a public ceremony. She believes that the intelligence community needs more visible role models, particularly young women who can inspire the next generation of analysts. My heart started racing. Public ceremony? Full media coverage? Pentagon briefing room? The works? She wants to use your story as an example of how critical intelligence work directly saves American lives. Colonel Hayes studied my reaction carefully. I know this goes against everything we've taught you about maintaining operational security and staying out of the spotlight. I stared at the official document on her desk, trying to reconcile what she was telling me with everything I'd learned about intelligence work over the past 3 years. We were supposed to be invisible, anonymous, the people who did crucial work but never took credit for it. What about operational security? What about protecting sources and methods? The mission details would remain classified, obviously, but General Morrison believes that the American people deserve to know that there are exceptional professionals working behind the scenes to protect their military personnel overseas. Colonel Hayes paused. Martinez, this is completely your choice. You can decline the public ceremony and receive the award through internal channels. No one would think less of you. I thought about Marcus and his team, pinned down in that bombed-out village with snipers closing in. I thought about the hours I'd spent analyzing terrain data, the moment when I'd found that impossible passage through the mountains, the relief in Colonel Hayes' voice when the rescue team reported successful extraction. But I also thought about all the times I'd been told to step back, to let someone else brief the media, to accept that my contributions would always be anonymous. I thought about the young women who might be considering careers in intelligence, but didn't see any role models who looked like them. Ma'am, can I have some time to think about this? Of course. General Morrison needs an answer by Friday, so you have 4 days to decide. I left Colonel Hayes' office feeling like I was walking through fog. The normal sounds of the operations center, keyboards clicking, radio chatter, the constant hum of electronics, seemed muted and distant. I sat down at my workstation and stared at my computer screen without really seeing it. Jake noticed my distraction around lunchtime. Hey, you okay? You've been staring at that same intelligence report for 2 hours without moving. I looked up at him, this colleague who'd become a friend over the past 3 years of long shifts and shared coffee breaks. Jake was 32, a former Navy intelligence specialist who'd transitioned to civilian contracting after his wife was diagnosed with cancer, and he needed to be closer to home. He understood the weight of responsibility that came with our work. Jake, if you had the opportunity to get public recognition for your work, but it meant stepping completely outside your comfort zone, would you do it? He leaned against my desk, his expression thoughtful. That's a loaded question. What's going on? I glanced around the operations center to make sure no one was listening, then told him about Colonel Hayes' offer and General Morrison's plan. Jake listened without interrupting. his expression growing more surprised as I explained the details. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he said, "Nick, in all the time I've known you, you've been the most dedicated analyst in this building. You work longer hours than anyone else. You catch details that the rest of us miss, and you genuinely care about the soldiers whose lives depend on your work. But you've also never advocated for yourself. You've never pushed for better assignments, never asked for recognition, never demanded the credit you deserve." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Maybe it's time to step into the spotlight, not just for yourself, but for all the people doing this job who never get recognized." That evening, I drove to a small diner about 20 minutes from the base, one of those places that served breakfast all day and had vinyl booths that had probably been there since the 1970s. I needed to think, and I did my best thinking over coffee and pie in anonymous public spaces where no one knew my name or my security clearance. I was halfway through a slice of apple pie when my phone rang. Marcus. "Hey, stranger, how are you holding up?" "I'm good," I said, though I wasn't sure that was entirely true. "How's the arm?" "Healing up fine." "Listen, I wanted to tell you something. I know I probably overstepped by mentioning your name in my debrief, but I felt like someone needed to know what you did for us out there." My throat tightened. "Marcus, you could have gotten in trouble for that." "Maybe, but it was worth it." "Nick, you saved 12 lives with that mission coordination. Not just mine, but 11 other soldiers who have families waiting for them at home." His voice was serious in a way I'd rarely heard from him. "I've been in the Army for 8 years, and I've never seen intelligence work that precise, that innovative, that perfect. It's my job," I said quietly. "No, it's more than that. It's a calling, and you're exceptional at it." He paused. "I heard through the rumor mill that something big might be coming your way, recognition-wise. If that's true, I want you to know that you deserve every bit of it." After we hung up, I sat in that diner booth for another hour, watching the sunset through the windows and thinking about everything that had led me to this moment. I thought about my decision to join the intelligence community straight out of college, driven by a desire to serve my country even if no one ever knew my name. I thought about the satisfaction I'd found in work that required precision, creativity, and an ability to see patterns that others missed. But mostly, I thought about what Jake had said, that maybe it was time to step into the spotlight not just for myself, but for everyone else doing this crucial, invisible work. By the time I left the diner, I'd made my decision. The next morning, I knocked on Colonel Hayes' office door at exactly 0800 hours. "Come in, Martinez. Have you made your decision?" "Yes, ma'am. I'd like to accept General Morrison's offer. I'll do the public ceremony." Colonel Hayes smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in 3 years. "I was hoping you'd say that. The ceremony is scheduled for next Friday at the Pentagon. You'll need to be in Washington by Thursday for briefings and preparation." As I left her office, I felt a mixture of excitement and terror that reminded me of the first time I jumped out of an airplane during my college ROTC training. I was about to step completely outside my comfort zone, but I was finally going to get the recognition I'd worked so hard for. More importantly, I was going to show other young women that intelligence work wasn't just about staying invisible. It was about having the courage to stand up and be counted when it mattered most. The week leading up to the Pentagon ceremony passed in a blur of phone calls, briefings, and a level of attention I'd never experienced in my career. General Morrison's staff contacted me daily with updates about the ceremony logistics, media interviews, and security protocols. Apparently, when the Pentagon decides to publicly recognize an intelligence analyst, it becomes a major production involving multiple departments and enough paperwork to fill a small library. Colonel Hayes assigned me to work with the Public Affairs Office to prepare for the media interviews that would follow the award ceremony. This meant spending hours with Captain Sarah Chen, a sharp-witted former journalist who joined the Army specifically to help the military communicate more effectively with the American public. "The key," Captain Chen explained during our first preparation session, "is to remember that you're not just representing yourself or even just the intelligence community. You're representing every service member who does crucial work behind the scenes." We were sitting in a small conference room at the Public Affairs Office, and Captain Chen had spread several newspapers across the table, all featuring stories about military operations and intelligence work. Most of the articles focused on policy debates or budget discussions, with very little attention paid to the actual people doing the work. The media tends to treat intelligence work as either completely boring or completely mysterious, she continued. Your story gives us an opportunity to show the human side, the analytical skills, the dedication, the real impact that intelligence professionals have on mission success and soldier safety. I studied the newspaper articles, trying to imagine myself being interviewed by the reporters who'd written them. The thought made my stomach turn. "Captain, I've never done a media interview in my life. What if I say something wrong? What if I accidentally reveal classified information? Captain Chen smiled. That's why we're practicing. We're going to spend the next 3 days going through every possible question they might ask, and I'm going to teach you how to give informative answers that stay completely within the bounds of operational security. She pulled out a digital recorder and set it on the table between us. Let's start with the basics. Tell me about your background, your education, and what drew you to intelligence work. For the next hour, Captain Chen grilled me with questions, recording my answers and then playing them back so I could hear how I sounded. It was brutally uncomfortable, hearing my own voice stumble through explanations, hearing myself say, and more times than I cared to count. You're too modest, Captain Chen observed after listening to my third attempt at explaining the rescue mission coordination. You keep minimizing your role, talking about how it was just doing my job, or how anyone could have done it. But that's not true, is it? I thought about the question seriously. No, I guess it's not. That terrain analysis was complex, and the approach route I identified wasn't obvious. It required combining multiple data sources and seeing patterns that weren't immediately apparent. Good. That's the level of confidence I need to hear in your voice when you talk to reporters. Captain Chen made notes on her pad. You're not bragging when you accurately describe your skills and contributions. You're educating the public about the expertise required for this work. Between media preparation sessions, I was also working with General Morrison's staff to understand the ceremony protocol. The award would be presented in the Pentagon's main briefing room, the same space where high-ranking military officials held press conferences about major policy announcements and international crises. The guest list included senior Pentagon officials, members of Congress, and representatives from various military and intelligence agencies. Your family will be seated in the front row, explained Lieutenant Colonel James Brooks, General Morrison's aide-de-camp. We understand your parents are flying in from El Paso? Yes, sir, my parents and my younger brother. I'd called them 3 days earlier to explain what was happening, and my mother had immediately started crying on the phone. My father, a retired postal worker who'd served 2 tours in Vietnam, had been characteristically stoic but clearly proud. The ceremony will begin at 1400 hours with General Morrison providing background about the Intelligence and Security Command's mission and the significance of the Award for Excellence. She'll then present your award and invite you to make brief remarks. My stomach dropped. Remarks? I thought I was just receiving the award. Lieutenant Colonel Brooks checked his notes. General Morrison specifically requested that you address the audience. She believes your story will be particularly inspiring to young people considering intelligence careers. That evening, I called Marcus to talk through my growing anxiety about the public speaking component. He was at his apartment in Fayetteville, probably getting ready for another early morning PT session, but he sounded genuinely happy to hear from me. Nick, you brief senior officers on complex intelligence matters every week. How is this different? Those briefings are about data and analysis, I explained, pacing around my apartment. This is about me, about my story, about inspiring other people. I don't know how to do that. Just tell the truth, Marcus said simply. Tell them about the work you do, why it matters, and what it felt like to coordinate that rescue mission. Don't try to be inspiring. Just be honest about your experience. What if I mess up? What if I say something stupid in front of all those important people? Marcus was quiet for a moment. Nick, when you were guiding that rescue team through impossible terrain to reach my squad, were you worried about saying something stupid? No, I was focused on getting you guys out safely. Exactly. You were focused on your mission. This ceremony is the same thing. Your mission is to represent the intelligence community and show people what this work really looks like. Focus on that mission, not on your nerves. After we hung up, I sat down at my laptop and started drafting the remarks I'd need to make at the ceremony. I wrote and rewrote the first paragraph at least 15 times, trying to find the right tone. Confident but not arrogant, informative but not boring, inspiring but not preachy. The speech was supposed to be 3 to 5 minutes long, which didn't sound like much until I tried to fit 3 years of experience and a career-defining mission into that time frame. I wanted to talk about the importance of intelligence work, the satisfaction of solving complex analytical problems, and the weight of responsibility that came with knowing that soldiers' lives depended on the accuracy of my analysis. By Thursday morning, I was as prepared as I was going to be. Captain Chen had pronounced my interview skills adequate for public consumption, and I'd practiced my ceremony remarks enough times that I could deliver them without notes. My dress blue uniform had been pressed and inspected by Colonel Hayes personally, and my parents had arrived in Washington the night before. The flight from Fayetteville to Reagan National Airport felt like it took forever, even though it was less than an hour in the air. I spent most of the time looking out the window at the Virginia countryside, thinking about how different my life had become in just 2 weeks. A month ago, I'd been perfectly content working in the shadows, analyzing data and coordinating missions that no one would ever publicly associate with my name. Now I was flying to the Pentagon to receive one of the intelligence community's highest honors in front of cameras and reporters who would broadcast my story across the country. My parents met me at the hotel in Arlington, and seeing them in the lobby almost made me cry. My mother, Maria Martinez, looked exactly like she had when I'd left for college 7 years earlier. Small and energetic, with graying hair she kept perfectly styled and clothes that were probably too formal for the occasion, but made her feel confident. My father, Robert, was quieter as always, but his proud smile told me everything I needed to know about how he felt about this moment. "Mija, we are so proud of you," my mother said, hugging me tightly in the hotel lobby. "Your father has been telling everyone in the neighborhood about the ceremony tomorrow." "Mom, please tell me you didn't call the El Paso Times." My father chuckled. "Only the family, Nick. But Mrs. Hernandez from next door did mention that she might call her cousin who works at the newspaper." That evening, we had dinner at a quiet restaurant near the hotel, and I tried to explain to my parents what the next day would involve. They'd never been to Washington, never seen the Pentagon, never been in the same room with generals and congressional representatives. I was worried they'd be overwhelmed by the formal protocol and media attention. "Nick," my father said over dessert, "your mother and I may not understand all the details of your work, but we understand that you've dedicated your life to protecting other people's children. Tomorrow, we get to watch you be recognized for that dedication. Nothing else matters." Later that night, alone in my hotel room, I stood at the window looking out at the Washington skyline and thinking about the journey that had brought me to this moment. In 12 hours, I would step completely out of the shadows that had defined my career and accept recognition for work that had always been anonymous. I thought about the 12 soldiers who were alive because of the mission I'd coordinated, about the young women who might consider intelligence careers after seeing my story, about the importance of showing the American people that their military was filled with dedicated professionals working behind the scenes to keep them safe. For the first time since Colonel Hayes had told me about General Morrison's offer, I felt ready for what was coming next. The Pentagon briefing room was more intimidating in person than it had looked in the photographs Captain Chen had shown me during our preparation sessions. The iconic blue backdrop with the Department of Defense seal dominated the front of the room, and rows of chairs filled with military officials, congressional staff, and journalists created an atmosphere of formal importance that made my mouth go dry. I stood in the hallway outside the briefing room with General Morrison, a tall woman in her mid-50s whose presence commanded immediate respect. Her silver hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her dress blue uniform displayed ribbons representing 3 decades of distinguished service. Despite her intimidating rank and reputation, she'd spent the past 20 minutes putting me at ease with casual conversation about my background and career goals. "Martinez, I want you to remember something," General Morrison said as we waited for the ceremony to begin. "You're not here because someone did you a favor or because we needed to fill a diversity quota. You're here because your analytical work and mission coordination skills represent the absolute best of what the intelligence community has to offer." "Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate that. I reviewed your personnel file extensively before recommending you for this award. Your performance evaluations are consistently superior, your technical skills are exceptional, and your dedication to mission success is exactly what we need more of in this community." She paused, studying me with sharp blue eyes. "The rescue mission that brought you to my attention wasn't a fluke. It was the natural result of years of professional development and commitment to excellence." Lieutenant Colonel Brooks appeared in the hallway and nodded to General Morrison. "Ma'am, we're ready to begin." As we entered the briefing room, I caught sight of my parents in the front row, my mother clutching my father's hand and both of them looking slightly overwhelmed by the formal military setting. Behind them, I spotted Colonel Hayes, Captain Chen, and several colleagues from the Operations Center who'd driven up from Fort Bragg for the ceremony. The audience rose as General Morrison approached the podium, and I took my position at a small lectern to the side, trying to control my breathing and remember everything Captain Chen had taught me about posture and eye contact. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today for this presentation of the Intelligence and Security Command Award for Excellence," General Morrison began, her voice carrying easily through the room's sound system. "This award recognizes intelligence professionals whose analytical skills, innovative thinking, and dedication to mission success have directly contributed to the safety and effectiveness of our military personnel." She went on to explain the ISC Award's history and significance, but I found myself focused on the faces in the audience. Some were colleagues and superiors I recognized, but others were complete strangers. Congressional staff members, Pentagon officials, and journalists who were here to document my story for the American public. This year's recipient exemplifies the highest standards of intelligence analysis and mission coordination. General Morrison continued. 3 weeks ago, a team of 12 American soldiers found themselves pinned down by enemy fire in hostile territory with limited ammunition and no clear route to safety. Their rescue required innovative tactical thinking, precise terrain analysis, and flawless coordination between multiple agencies. As she described the rescue mission in general terms, carefully avoiding any classified details, I thought about those 6 hours I'd spent guiding the rescue team through impossible terrain, the relief I'd felt when they reported successful extraction, the satisfaction of knowing that analytical work I'd done at a computer terminal had directly saved 12 lives. The intelligence analyst who coordinated this mission identified an approach route that military tacticians had dismissed as impossible. Her analysis combined geological surveys, satellite imagery, and real-time intelligence to create a rescue plan that brought all 12 soldiers home safely. General Morrison turned to look at me directly. Senior Analyst Nicole Martinez, please step forward. My legs felt unsteady as I approached the podium, but I managed to maintain military bearing as General Morrison presented me with the award, a crystal plaque mounted on dark wood, with an engraved citation that summarized my contributions to the rescue mission. Senior Analyst Martinez, would you like to address the audience? This was the moment I'd been dreading and preparing for in equal measure. I stepped up to the microphone, looked out at the audience of senior military officials and journalists, and took a deep breath. Thank you, General Morrison, for this incredible honor. 3 years ago, when I decided to pursue a career in intelligence analysis, I thought I understood what the work would involve. I expected to spend my days studying data, writing reports, and supporting military operations from behind the scenes. My voice was steadier than I'd expected, and I could see my parents in the front row, both of them smiling with obvious pride. What I didn't anticipate was how personal this work would become. Every intelligence report I write, every analysis I provide, every mission I coordinate is ultimately about protecting the sons and daughters, the fathers and mothers, the husbands and wives who serve our country in dangerous places around the world. I glanced at the notes I'd prepared but found that I didn't need them. The words were coming naturally, driven by 3 years of experience and genuine passion for the work I'd chosen. The rescue mission that brings us here today wasn't successful because of any single person's efforts. It succeeded because of teamwork, field commanders who trusted analytical assessments, soldiers who executed a complex plan under extreme pressure, and support personnel who worked 18-hour days to ensure every detail was perfect. I could see journalists taking notes, cameras recording my words, and senior officials nodding in agreement with my emphasis on collaborative effort. But I want to particularly address any young people who might be watching this ceremony or reading about it later. Intelligence work isn't glamorous. It doesn't involve high-speed chases or dramatic confrontations. Most days, it's about sitting at a computer terminal, analyzing data that other people might find boring, and solving puzzles that don't have obvious solutions. I paused, thinking about all the 18-hour days, the cold coffee, the pressure of knowing that lives depended on getting the analysis right. But it's also incredibly rewarding work. When you can take scattered pieces of information and turn them into actionable intelligence that keeps soldiers safe, when you can identify patterns that others miss and provide insights that directly impact mission success, that's when you realize that this work matters in ways that are difficult to quantify but impossible to ignore. The room was completely silent except for the soft clicking of camera shutters and the occasional rustle of note-taking. To young women especially, I want you to know that there's a place for you in this community. Your analytical skills, your attention to detail, your ability to see problems from different perspectives, these are exactly the qualities that make exceptional intelligence professionals. Don't let anyone tell you that this work isn't for you, because I can tell you from personal experience that it absolutely is. I looked directly at the cameras, thinking about all the young women who might see this ceremony broadcast on the evening news or read about it in their local newspapers. Finally, I want to thank the soldiers whose lives were at stake during that rescue mission. Your service and sacrifice give meaning to everything we do in the intelligence community. Knowing that our work directly contributes to bringing you home safely to your families, that's what gets us through the long days and difficult challenges. I stepped back from the microphone, and the room erupted in applause that seemed to go on forever. General Morrison shook my hand, and I could see my mother wiping tears from her eyes while my father stood and clapped with obvious pride. After the ceremony, I was swept into a series of media interviews that lasted nearly 2 hours. Captain Chen had prepared me well. I was able to discuss my background and the importance of intelligence work without revealing any classified information, and I found myself actually enjoying the opportunity to educate reporters about what intelligence professionals really do. One interview particularly stood out. A young female reporter from CNN asked me about the challenges of working in a male-dominated field and whether I'd ever experienced discrimination or been told that intelligence work wasn't suitable for women. I've been fortunate to work with colleagues and supervisors who've judged me based on my performance rather than my gender, I answered honestly. But I know that's not everyone's experience, and I think it's important for organizations to actively work toward creating inclusive environments where everyone can contribute their best work. What advice would you give to young women considering careers in intelligence or military service? I thought about my own journey, about the doubts I'd had when I first started this work, about the satisfaction I'd found in solving complex analytical problems. Don't let other people's expectations limit your ambitions. Intelligence work requires skills that many women naturally excel at: attention to detail, analytical thinking, the ability to synthesize information from multiple sources. If you're interested in this work, pursue it. The country needs your skills and perspectives. After the interviews, my parents and I had dinner at a restaurant near the Pentagon, and I finally had a chance to decompress from the intensity of the day. "Mija, we watched you on television today," my mother said, still seeming slightly amazed by the whole experience. "You looked so professional, so confident. I don't think I've ever been more proud." My father, characteristically more reserved, simply nodded his agreement. "You represented our family well today, Nick, but more importantly, you represented all the young people who are trying to figure out how they can serve their country." That evening, back in my hotel room, I turned on the news to see how the ceremony had been covered. The story appeared on several networks, with clips of my speech and interviews with General Morrison about the importance of recognizing intelligence professionals. One segment particularly caught my attention. A retired general serving as a television analyst said, "What we saw today represents a significant shift in how the military talks about intelligence work. For too long, these crucial contributions have remained invisible to the American public. By highlighting individuals like senior analyst Martinez, we're showing people that national security depends on dedicated professionals working behind the scenes." My phone had been buzzing with text messages throughout the evening. Congratulations from colleagues, friends from college who'd seen the news coverage, and former professors who'd taught me the analytical skills I'd used in my intelligence career. One message particularly stood out. It was from Marcus. "Watched the ceremony online. You were incredible up there. Thank you for telling the world about the work you do and why it matters. Those 12 soldiers you saved are probably watching the news tonight and feeling grateful all over again." As I prepared for bed, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in just a few weeks. I'd gone from being completely anonymous to having my face and story broadcast across the country. The thought was both thrilling and terrifying, but more than that, I felt a sense of responsibility I'd never experienced before. Young people would see my story and potentially be inspired to consider intelligence careers. Military families would understand more about the professionals working to keep their loved ones safe. The American public would have a better appreciation for the complex work that goes into national security. I'd stepped out of the shadows, and there was no going back. But for the first time since this whole journey began, I was completely confident that stepping into the light had been the right decision. The morning after the Pentagon ceremony, I woke up in my hotel room to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. My phone had been on silent since the evening news coverage, but apparently the story of my award had gained more traction than anyone had anticipated. The first call I returned was to Colonel Hayes, who sounded both proud and slightly overwhelmed when she answered. "Martinez, I hope you're ready for what comes next, because your phone is going to be ringing for the next several weeks." I sat up in bed, still trying to shake off the grogginess of sleep. "Ma'am, what do you mean? I've received calls from 3 different universities asking if you'd be willing to speak at their ROTC programs, 2 from high schools with strong military preparation programs, and 1 from the Association of Women in Intelligence asking if you'd keynote their annual conference." Colonel Hayes paused. "There's also been interest from some congressional offices about testifying at hearings on intelligence community recruitment and retention." My stomach dropped. "Congressional testimony? It's all voluntary, of course. But Martinez, whether you intended it or not, you've become a public face for intelligence work. That comes with opportunities, but also with responsibilities and challenges." After hanging up with Colonel Hayes, I scrolled through the text messages, trying to process the range of responses to yesterday's ceremony. Most were congratulatory messages from friends and colleagues, but several stood out. One was from my college roommate Sarah, who now worked as a software engineer in Seattle. "Nick, saw you on the news last night. I had no idea this was the kind of work you were doing. You looked amazing up there, and your speech was incredible. I'm so proud to know you." Another was from my high school guidance counselor, Mrs. Rodriguez. "Nicole, I showed the news coverage to my current seniors, and 3 of them have already asked me about military intelligence careers. You're inspiring the next generation. But mixed in with the positive messages were a few that gave me pause. One was from a former colleague who'd left the intelligence community for private sector work. "Nick, be careful about how much public exposure you take on. This field depends on people staying anonymous, and too much visibility can limit your future assignment options." As I got dressed and prepared to meet my parents for breakfast before their flight back to El Paso, I found myself wondering if I'd made the right decision. The ceremony had felt like a triumph, but the morning after was bringing a sobering realization of what it meant to be a public figure in a profession that traditionally valued anonymity above all else. Breakfast with my parents was both celebratory and bittersweet. They were clearly proud of what I'd accomplished, but I could see the concern in their eyes as they talked about the media attention and what it might mean for my safety and career. "Mija, are you going to be okay with all this attention?" my mother asked over coffee and pastries. "Yesterday was wonderful, but I worry about you being so visible now." My father, characteristically more direct, cut straight to the heart of the matter. "Nick, your work has always been dangerous because of what you know and who you support. Now you're also visible. That's a different kind of risk." I'd been trying not to think about the security implications of my newfound public profile, but my father's comment forced me to confront the reality. Intelligence professionals stayed anonymous partly for operational security, but also for personal safety. By stepping into the spotlight, I'd potentially made myself a target for anyone who wanted to harm American intelligence operations. After my parents left for the airport, I spent the morning walking around Washington, trying to clear my head and think through what came next. The city was bustling with tourists and government workers, and I found myself wondering if any of them had seen the ceremony coverage, if they recognized me from the news. Around noon, my phone rang with a call from an unknown number. Normally, I wouldn't answer, but given the events of the past 24 hours, I decided to pick up. "Is this senior analyst Nicole Martinez?" The voice was professional, businesslike. "Yes, this is Nicole Martinez." "Ms. Martinez, my name is David Chen, and I'm a producer with 60 Minutes. We'd like to discuss the possibility of doing a longer feature story about your work and the role of intelligence analyst in military operations." My heart started racing. 60 Minutes was one of the most prestigious news programs in the country, watched by millions of Americans every Sunday evening. A feature story would mean exponentially more exposure than yesterday's ceremony coverage. "Mr. Chen, I appreciate your interest, but I need to discuss any media appearances with my superiors. Can I get your contact information and have someone from our public affairs office reach out to you?" "Of course, but I want you to know that we're very interested in telling this story responsibly, focusing on the importance of intelligence work and the professionals who dedicate their careers to keeping America safe." After hanging up, I immediately called Captain Chen to discuss the 60 Minutes request. She was in her office at Fort Bragg, probably dealing with a dozen other media inquiries related to my story. "Nick, I've been fielding calls all morning about interview requests and speaking opportunities. The Pentagon is putting together guidance for how to handle ongoing media interest, but you need to understand that this level of attention is unprecedented for someone at your level in the intelligence community. Is that good or bad?" Captain Chen was quiet for a moment. "It's complicated. The exposure is great for recruiting and public understanding of intelligence work, but it also means you're going to have to be very careful about operational security, personal safety, and managing expectations about what you can and can't discuss publicly." That afternoon, I flew back to North Carolina, and the difference in how people treated me was immediately apparent. The flight attendant recognized me from the news coverage and quietly thanked me for my service. A businessman in the airport approached me to shake my hand and thank me for representing the intelligence community so well. But it was when I returned to the operations center on Monday morning that the real impact of my newfound visibility became clear. My colleagues were supportive and congratulatory, but there was also a subtle shift in the dynamic. I was no longer just another analyst. I was the analyst who'd been on national television, who'd received awards from Pentagon generals, who represented the public face of our work. Jake was characteristically direct about the change. "Nick, everyone's proud of what you accomplished, but you need to know that some people are concerned about what this means for operational security and team dynamics." I sat down at my workstation, which looked exactly the same as it had 2 weeks earlier, but somehow felt different now. "What kind of concerns?" "Nothing personal against you, but there's worry that having a high-profile analyst in the unit could compromise our ability to work anonymously. There's also some concern that the media attention might create pressure to put you on high-visibility assignments that aren't necessarily the best fit for your skills." Over the next few days, I began to understand what Jake meant. I was assigned to brief senior officers on intelligence matters more frequently than before, and I noticed that my superiors were more likely to ask for my input on matters outside my usual areas of expertise. It wasn't necessarily negative attention, but it was different, and it came with pressures I'd never experienced. The most significant change came Thursday afternoon, when Colonel Hayes called me into her office for a conversation that would reshape my understanding of what my career could become. "Martinez, I've been in discussions with General Morrison's staff about your future assignment options. Your public profile has created some unique opportunities, but also some constraints." "What kind of constraints, ma'am?" "Certain assignments that require complete anonymity are no longer available to you. Deep cover work, some types of field intelligence gathering, assignments that require you to maintain a completely separate professional identity." Colonel Hayes paused, studying my reaction. "On the other hand, there are opportunities opening up that weren't available before." She handed me a folder containing what looked like several official documents and assignment descriptions. "General Morrison has asked if you'd be interested in a position with the Defense Intelligence Agency's Training Command. You'd be developing curriculum for intelligence analysis courses, mentoring junior analysts, and occasionally representing the intelligence community at public events and congressional briefings." I opened the folder and began reading through the assignment details. It was a significant promotion, with increased responsibility and higher security clearance levels. But it was also a complete departure from the operational intelligence work I'd been doing for the past 3 years. "Ma'am, this sounds like an incredible opportunity, but it's also very different from what I've been doing. Would I still be doing analytical work?" "Some, but your primary role would be educational and representational. You'd be helping to train the next generation of intelligence analysts and serving as a liaison between the intelligence community and the public." Colonel Hayes leaned back in her chair. "Martinez, your technical skills are exceptional, but your ability to communicate about intelligence work to non-specialists is even more valuable right now." I stared at the assignment documents, trying to imagine myself in classrooms instead of operation centers, giving speeches instead of writing intelligence reports, being a public figure instead of an anonymous analyst. "Can I have some time to think about this?" "Of course. But I need to know by next Friday. General Morrison wants to announce your new assignment as part of a broader initiative to improve intelligence community recruitment and public understanding." That evening, I called Marcus to talk through my confusion about the career crossroads I was facing. He was at his apartment, probably preparing for another deployment, but he sounded genuinely interested in helping me work through the decision. "Nick, what do you enjoy most about your current work?" "The problem-solving aspect, the satisfaction of finding patterns in complex data, the knowledge that my analysis directly contributes to mission success." I paused, thinking about the rescue mission that had started this whole journey. "I love knowing that the work I do keeps soldiers safe." "And what concerns you about this new opportunity?" "I'm worried that I'll become more of a spokesperson than an analyst, that I'll lose touch with the operational work that made me good at this job in the first place." I was pacing around my apartment, trying to organize my thoughts. "I also worry about whether I'm qualified to train other analysts when I've only been doing this work for 3 years. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Nick, can I tell you something that might help you think about this differently?" "Please." "When our squad was pinned down in that village, the thing that saved us wasn't just your technical analysis skills. It was your ability to see the bigger picture, to think creatively about problems, and to communicate complex information clearly to people who needed to act on it immediately." His voice was serious, thoughtful. "Those are exactly the skills that would make you an exceptional trainer and representative for the intelligence community." After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table with the assignment documents spread out in front of me, trying to envision what my life would look like in this new role. It would mean more public appearances, more media interviews, more visibility, but it would also mean the opportunity to shape how the next generation of intelligence analysts approached their work, and to help the American public understand the crucial work being done by professionals they'd never see or hear about. For the first time since receiving General Morrison's offer, I began to think that maybe the most important work I could do wasn't behind a computer terminal analyzing data, but in front of classrooms and congressional committees, helping other people understand why that analytical work mattered so much. 6 months later, I stood in front of a classroom at the Defense Intelligence Agency's training facility in Washington, looking out at 24 junior analysts who were about to begin their first advanced course in tactical intelligence coordination. The faces staring back at me were young, eager, and diverse. Exactly the kind of people I'd hoped to inspire when I'd decided to accept General Morrison's offer to step into the spotlight. The transition from operational analyst to instructor and public representative had been more challenging than I'd anticipated, but also more rewarding. My days now consisted of developing training curricula, mentoring junior intelligence professionals, and occasionally representing the intelligence community at congressional hearings and public events. "Before we begin today's lesson on multi-source terrain analysis," I said to the class, "I want you to understand something fundamental about intelligence work. Every analysis you produce, every report you write, Every recommendation you make has the potential to directly impact the safety and success of military personnel in the field. I clicked to the first slide of my presentation, which showed a satellite image of mountainous terrain that would look familiar to anyone who'd followed the news coverage of my award ceremony. 6 months ago, I was sitting at a computer terminal very similar to the ones you'll be working with, trying to find a way to extract 12 American soldiers who were pinned down by enemy fire in hostile territory. I gestured to the terrain image. The conventional wisdom said that rescue through this terrain was impossible. The standard tactical manuals didn't offer any viable approach routes. One of the students, a young woman who reminded me of myself at that age, raised her hand. "Ma'am, how did you identify the approach route that everyone else had missed?" Excellent question, Analyst Foster. The key was combining multiple data sources that aren't normally used together: geological surveys, weather pattern analysis, and real-time intelligence about enemy positions. By overlaying all that information, I could see patterns that weren't apparent when looking at any single data source. I spent the next hour walking the class through the analytical process I'd used for that rescue mission, explaining how to combine different types of intelligence and think creatively about seemingly impossible problems. But more importantly, I tried to help them understand the weight of responsibility that came with this work. The reason we spend so much time on accuracy and thoroughness isn't because we're perfectionists, I explained. It's because real people depend on getting our analysis right. When you're providing intelligence that will determine whether soldiers go home safely to their families, good enough isn't good enough. After class, several students approached me with questions about career development, assignment options, and how to handle the pressure of knowing that lives depended on their work. These conversations were among the most satisfying parts of my new role, helping young professionals navigate the same challenges I'd faced, but with the benefit of guidance I'd never received. Analyst Foster lingered after the other students had left. "Ma'am, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course. How do you handle the pressure of being so visible now? I mean, I've seen your interviews and congressional testimony, and it seems like a lot of responsibility to represent the entire intelligence community." I thought about her question seriously. It was something I struggled with regularly. The knowledge that my words and actions reflected not just on me, but on every intelligence professional working behind the scenes. It is a lot of pressure, I admitted. But I try to remember that visibility comes with the opportunity to advocate for resources, recognition, and respect for intelligence professionals. Every time I speak publicly about this work, I'm trying to help people understand that national security depends on dedicated analysts like the ones in this classroom. That afternoon, I had a meeting with General Morrison to discuss the intelligence community's recruitment and retention initiatives. These monthly meetings had become an important part of my new role, providing input on policies that would affect the next generation of intelligence professionals. "Martinez, I wanted to discuss the congressional hearing next week," General Morrison said, as we sat in her Pentagon office. "The House Intelligence Committee is particularly interested in your perspective on how to attract young people to intelligence careers." "Yes, ma'am. I've been reviewing the committee's questions and preparing my testimony." "Good. I also wanted to tell you about some feedback we've been receiving from universities and high schools where you've spoken." General Morrison pulled out a folder of reports. "Applications for intelligence-related programs are up 30% compared to last year, and the demographic profile of applicants shows significant improvement in terms of diversity." I felt a surge of pride reading through the reports. Young women, minorities, and first-generation college students were applying for intelligence programs at unprecedented rates, many of them specifically citing my story as inspiration for their career choices. "There's one more thing," General Morrison continued. "We've been asked to provide intelligence community representation at the NATO Intelligence Conference in Brussels next month. It's a high-visibility assignment, and I'd like you to be part of the delegation." My heart rate increased. International conferences were a completely different level of visibility and responsibility from domestic speaking engagements. "Ma'am, I'm honored by the opportunity, but are you sure I'm qualified for that level of representation?" General Morrison smiled. "Martinez, you've testified before Congress, spoken at major universities, and represented the intelligence community in media interviews watched by millions of Americans. You're absolutely qualified." That evening, I called Marcus to tell him about the NATO assignment. He was between deployments, stationed at Fort Campbell in Kentucky, and our regular phone conversations had become an important source of support and perspective as I navigated my new career path. "Nick, that's incredible. You're going to represent American intelligence at an international conference?" "Apparently so. I'm terrified and excited in equal measure." Marcus chuckled. "That sounds about right for you. Remember when you were terrified about coordinating that rescue mission? How did that turn out?" "Point taken. But Marcus, sometimes I wonder if I'm in over my head with all this public representation. I went from being completely anonymous to being the face of intelligence work, and I'm not sure I'm qualified for that level of responsibility. Nick, can I tell you something? A few weeks ago, I was talking to some soldiers who just finished basic training, and they were asking about different military occupational specialties. When intelligence work came up, 3 of them mentioned seeing your story on the news and being inspired to consider analytical careers. He paused, letting that sink in. You're not just representing intelligence work. You're inspiring people to dedicate their careers to protecting others. That's exactly the kind of leadership the intelligence community needs. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment reviewing the materials for the NATO conference, trying to prepare for what would be the most significant professional challenge of my career. I'd be presenting alongside intelligence officials from allied nations, discussing coordination strategies and sharing best practices for analytical methodologies. But more than that, I'd be representing not just American intelligence capabilities, but the principle that intelligence work could be both professional and public-facing, that the men and women who did this crucial work deserved recognition and respect. As I prepared for bed, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. 18 months earlier, I'd been perfectly content working in the shadows, analyzing data, and coordinating missions that no one would ever publicly associate with my name. I'd accepted anonymity as the price of doing work that mattered. Now, I was preparing to represent American intelligence at an international conference, training the next generation of analysts, and serving as a public advocate for intelligence professionals across the government. The transformation hadn't always been comfortable. There were still days when I missed the quiet satisfaction of operational analysis, when I worried about whether I was qualified for the level of responsibility I'd accepted, when I questioned whether stepping into the spotlight had been the right decision. But then I'd get an email from a young woman who'd decided to pursue an intelligence career after hearing my story. Or I'd see one of my students successfully complete their first complex analytical assignment. Or I'd receive feedback that congressional testimony I'd provided had led to increased funding for intelligence training programs. In those moments, I knew that this new mission, representing intelligence work publicly, training future analysts, and advocating for the professionals who kept America safe, was exactly where I was supposed to be. The work looked different than I'd originally envisioned, but the core mission remained the same. Using my skills and experience to protect American lives and interests, I just expanded my definition of how that protection could be provided. As I turned off the lights in my apartment, I thought about the 12 soldiers whose rescue had started this entire journey. They were safe, continuing their military careers, probably never thinking about the intelligence analyst who'd coordinated their extraction from that hostile village. But I thought about them every day, and about all the other soldiers, analysts, and intelligence professionals whose safety and success depended on the work we did behind the scenes, and, increasingly, in the public eye. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to represent the intelligence community, and new chances to inspire young people to dedicate their careers to this crucial work. I was ready for whatever came next. The shadows had been comfortable, but the light was where I could make the biggest difference.